President Obama, Speaker Boehner, I am a huge Star Trek fan. At Starfleet Academy, where starship captains are trained, they all go through a simulated scenario to rescue a civilian spaceship called the Kobayashi Maru. This is a no-win simulation. In fact, the computer is programmed to destroy the starship if it tries to rescue the Kobayashi Maru. And if the Kobayashi Maru is not rescued, then more than 300 civilians will die. Only one Starfleet candidate has ever beat the Kobayashi Maru. On his third attempt, Captain James T. Kirk reconfigured the computer simulation program so that the scenario could be winnable. He won by changing the parameters of the game, and yes, he became the most famous Starfleet captain in the Star Trek series. Like Captain Kirk, I don't believe in no-win scenarios. I believe that if all that is presented is a lose-lose situation, then the parameters of the scenario must be changed. This is like the national debt. Some do not want to cut spending, and others don't want to raise taxes. In adopting these hard lines, our politicians and hardline advocates have put us on the path of destruction. Our national debt is at $16 trillion and growing. According to the Concord Coalition, in fiscal year 2012, the government spent $3.6 trillion, but it only collected $2.5 trillion in revenues. This scenario cannot be allowed to continue. If it does, who will pay the cost? We will. The youth of the nation will pay the price tomorrow for today's mistakes. Our government has procrastinated fixing this for far too long, allowing the rising mountain of debt to continue swelling at a disturbing rate. The cause of the growing deficit is that there is too little money going into the system with too much being spent. Too much being spent. It's as if the government is not checking its own bank account, and that is the height of fiscal irresponsibility. If our situation is so lost and hopeless, what choice do we have? Where do we turn to in this no-win scenario? We must change what we're doing. First, let's look at the issue of revenue. Our government lacks the funds it needs to operate and fulfill its commitments to its citizens of the United States. The most obvious way to fix this issue is to raise taxes to those in the top wage brackets. The top 1% of the population, according to Forbes.com, owns 43% of the nation's wealth. The next 4% control an additional 29%. That means that the top 5% owns 72% of the U.S. wealth. The bottom 80%, yes, 80%, only owns 7% of the nation's wealth. It wasn't always like this. In 1976, the top 1% took home only 9% of the national income. Today, the top 1% takes home 25% of the national income. Taxes are a way to even the playing field. We need to raise taxes on the top 5%. Secondly, we need to cut spending, but we need to do so carefully. Government spending is part of the national economy. We cannot cut it too drastically or we will damage the economy. The United States military, for example, is one of the top funded and largest in the world. In 2012, the U.S. military received about $1 billion more than the second highest military spending country in the world, China. Even trimming just a small percentage from this military budget could save lots of money. Social Security, Medicare, and the new Obama health care plan all spend or will spend tremendous amounts of money. We need to manage those entitlement programs so that they do not drain on our economy. We need to change the parameters of this game. Like I said, I don't believe in no-win scenarios. It's time to go James T. Kirk on this Kobayashi Maru situation. It's time to take control of our problems and deal with them head on. Thank you.
President Obama, Speaker Boehner, and Senator Majority Leader Reid. As you are well aware, these past few years, our deficit has grown to the largest nominal numbers in U.S. history, currently $16.8 trillion and rising. This deficit is something that will one day have to be paid off, and at this rate will be through the economic disparity of my generation and ones to come. This isn't a deficit where we can just print more money or erase some zeros. This is money that the government is going to have to save and raise. Just to get rid of this deficit, every individual in this country would have to pay $50,000. There are two ways the government can pay off its debt, either by increasing taxes and or by reducing government spending. In address to the first approach, President Obama, this year the fiscal cliff in the Affordable Care Act will implement 13 new tax increases, including a top marginal tax rate on investment, and a payroll tax. These combined increases are projected to raise revenue of $150 billion. These tax increases, that will help in reducing the effects of government spending on our debt, will weigh heavily on how the middle class, workers, and our economy can grow under these conditions. The middle class for years has been struggling since the recession of 2007. And though our national GDP has been increasing and jobs have continued to rise, workers entering the workforce have done so at a proportional rate, and our economy has not been able to grow. And compounded with government spending at record highs, having more than doubled from $1.7 trillion in 2000 to currently $3.5 trillion. It's evident that our country is not taking the necessary and sufficient measures to reducing our deficit. Our total spending to GDP ratio has risen to about 42%. And apart from the last few years, we haven't had these high of numbers since the end of World War II. Across the board, government spending in almost every sector has risen for the past 11 years. Though government's role is vital to many parts of the economic functions, including defense, infrastructure, and stimulating the economy and many more, there are cuts that need to be made and more strict regulations to ensure our financial resources are being distributed properly. The sequestration, now in effect after March 1st, plans to cut $1.2 trillion from government spending within the next 11 years. But there's been a lot of remark on these being brash and senseless means of cutting government spending to sectors that are in need of them. The sequestration will be reducing defense next year by 13% and 9% to non-defense programs. And though reducing government spending is an important factor, the sequestration will indiscriminately and evenly cut government spending from sectors. In this way, the sequestration is not an efficient means of reducing our government spending. This government is not frugal with its money, and I believe time needs to be taken to sort through government expenditures such as defense programs that are too expensive, like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which is now a $400 billion project that's already 70% over budget and 7 years behind schedule, or subsidies that are being wasted, or unemployment benefits being paid to the wealthy. We need to start taking action now on reducing our deficit and easing the burden on our future generations. This is not a task we can immediately accomplish, but it's a process that has to be done. Among others, the spending cuts of the sequestration are not an efficient means of reducing our deficit. So I implore you to start taking action and working together to reduce and come up with ways that will help the generation of tomorrow.
President Obama, Speaker Boehner, and Senate Majority Leader Reid. I am a number, 53,116 and 69 cents to be exact. This is my share in dollars of the debt, and I'll be paying it off for the rest of my life. I stand before you not as an economist or a political advisor, but as a college-bound high school student concerned about the future of our nation. It has been predicted that the San Diego economy will lose $1 billion due to cuts in defense spending caused by the sequester of March 2013. My father, having served in the Marines, taught me to uphold honorable and patriotic values that he learned in combat training. To take away basic services of defense and to deprive young men, like he was, their livelihood, is committing a crime. Must we sacrifice jobs to pay for the lack of initiative shown by Washington? The example set by our government is that it's okay to put off for tomorrow what we can solve for today. Crippled by debt, will my generation be able to save our country from ruin? Currently, the U.S. government, investors, and future retirees finance 2/3 of our $16 trillion in debt. As a young person, I wonder, is this what it's come to? Can we claim to be a global power when we struggle to support our own population? Our nation's healthcare system costs $2.5 trillion, an amount that equals the GDP of 5 countries put together. Social Security for my generation is anything but what its name implies. There is no guarantee of a secure future or of retirement. Can Congress support a balanced approach to debt reduction, one that focuses on reforming government programs, including entitlement, to improve efficiency? Without entitlement reform, there is a mathematical certainty that social services will be slashed in the future, leaving nothing for the youth. To solve this issue, Republicans don't want to increase taxes, Democrats don't want to cut Social Security and Medicare, and the debates rage on. Something has to change. This time last year, I couldn't tell the difference between a debt and a deficit. I now know that the U.S. government has been adding approximately $4 billion to the debt every day since September of 2007. The cyclical partisan battles in Washington only distract from the crisis. The debates between Congress and the White House regarding the fiscal cliff, sequestration, and continuing resolution fail to address the strategy that can solve the problem of our debt and the long-term fiscal deficits that plague the United States. The budget illustrates our nation's moral compass, one that forecasts an insecure future, and I fear that the needle will never point north. I believe in a future where young people should not be obligated to pay over $50,000 out of pocket to support unsustainable government programs of today. I believe that by identifying rising healthcare costs as the source of ineffectual spending, we can relieve the pressure on future generations to pay for today's benefits tomorrow. I believe in the American venture and the dream that many have of realizing success. I believe in the day that the growing gap between the rich and the poor shrinks, where everyone shares the same pays the same taxes, and shares the same benefits. I believe in our rights as American citizens to advocate for what we believe in, and that is a reduction in the national debt so that young people can enjoy the same benefits that all citizens enjoy today. President Obama, Speaker Boehner, and Senate Majority Leader Reid, listen to me when I say that I am not just a number, but an ambitious youth with hopes for a bright future. I believe that with great motivation, our moral compass can point towards a bright future for our nation, where all Americans can have the same benefits that we enjoy today. Thank you.
I'm Jack Conway, and I'm a current senior at Canyon Crest Academy. So to President Obama, Speaker John Boehner, and Majority Leader Reid, and also our esteemed panel of judges, all of us Americans here talking about America's debt. It's been 237 years since Mr. Jefferson sealed our unique American identity of freedom in the Declaration of Independence. And in that time, we've also signed another declaration, this time not to independence, but rather dependence. We've signed a silent and invisible Declaration of Independence to debt. Today, with $16.8 trillion in national debt, we see that this dependence can be dangerous. That is $6 trillion more than when President Obama took office 5 years ago. Now, I'm not laying the blame solely on President Obama. I hope we can agree that it's been prior presidents, as well as current and former Congresses, that have led us to our current debt. However, what I am stating is that we're not in the right direction on slowing the growth of our debt, let alone trying to lower it. So let's physically talk about debt and try to make it a little less abstract. First, we have to think of what debt is and if it's always a bad thing. Well, debt is the result of loans. Much like in our own lives, how we take out loans to buy a new car or pay the mortgages on our homes, the U.S. government takes loans to pay for the military and our many social programs. These loans are not always harmful. You took out a loan to purchase a new car, and now you drive that car to your job every day, making money for your family. That mortgage you took out on your home is now going towards living in a nice area, so now your children will have better access to better schools and get higher paying jobs in the future. But you see, the benefits only come if you're able to pay off these loans and their added interest. If not, you're being financially irresponsible, and that's what our country is choosing to do today, being wholly and financially irresponsible by taking loans out to pay the ones that have already been taken out. The result of this irresponsibility is higher interest rates, making those loan benefits I just talked about much less beneficial, and a slower economy because the higher interest rates freezing up money, making for a much weaker job market. So why do we let this slide? Because unlike our own debt, which is accountable to us and us only, the national debt can conveniently be pushed onto future voting Americans like myself and those not even born. Loans can be bad when they are used in excess and cannot be paid, and as our deficit and national debt show, we are indeed spending on the excess and not paying all our bills. Now, to fix this problem of the ever-increasing debt, here's my three-step prescription. First, a Republican sacrifice, cutting our military spending. Currently, the U.S. spends more on the military than any country on earth. Just last year, $711 billion. To me, this isn't surprising or necessarily wrong. However, this next fact is strange to me. America also spends more than the other top 15 countries combined. We're talking China, the UK, France, Japan, then 10 more. To cut military spending, I believe we must reduce the size of our Army, that specific branch, reform military retiree compensation, and frankly, build fewer ships and planes. Second, a democratic sacrifice, cutting healthcare spending. The U.S., similarly to military spending, spends more on their average citizen's healthcare than any other country in the world. To reduce healthcare costs, I find it imperative that we raise the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 67, and more openly, make many of the preventative medicines that can currently only be received following a doctor's prescription available over the counter. Third, and this may seem like a step backwards, I firmly believe we need to lower our country's nominal corporate tax rate. At 35%, our country's nominal corporate tax rate is the highest in the world, higher than socialist countries like Sweden and Norway, whose nominal rates sit just right above 25%. This high tax rate is lowering our competitiveness with overseas companies, greatly lowering our appeal as a place to do business. And with such a high rate, we're losing out on our best potential growth. And despite what might be said today, I do believe the greatest cure to the national debt is a growing economy. With these measures, we can successfully wean ourselves off our dependence to debt. However, if we continue to push things off, eventually we'll be at a point too late, too chaotic, to deal with this problem. Together, let's secure our futures, secure the future of future Americans, and declare ourselves independent from excess, independent from waste. Let's put faith back in what many think is an ideal of the past, the American dream. Let's declare ourselves independent from debt. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Griffin, and I am a millennial. The person standing before you has already been labeled lazy, narcissistic, and entitled. I am $52,000 in debt to the government and haven't even graduated from high school. I'll never forget 9/11 and the impact it had on our country. I witnessed the devastation of the housing bubble as my friends and family lost their homes. I've only known war and domestic terrorism throughout my life. However, it wasn't until now as I must choose between a higher education and a job that I realized all that I have ever known was just a stepping stone to our economic crisis. President Roosevelt had once said, "Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment." And so now I'd like to address to you, Mr. President Obama and Speaker Boehner, in regards to important issues that will affect my generation for years to come. I speak of the U.S. economy. The national debt is increasing exponentially each year, the housing market continues to falter, and the unemployment rate remains high. With more people today requiring government assistance due to the financial crisis, we will have no money to support tomorrow. We need to reignite our economic growth by rebuilding our industries, ensuring that producing goods in America can be profitable. Currently, we import more goods than export. And encouraging manufacturing overseas to cut costs, this will never sustain our economy. As President Obama has stated, we need to make our tax codes more competitive by ending tax breaks for companies that ship jobs overseas and reward companies that create jobs here at home. We need to invest in research and development to allow us to harness more of our own energy and attain the technologies that will make us more successful in a global market. This will provide our private sectors the financial confidence to promote job security and growth. Ultimately, our goal is to get America back to work. For our nation to be successful, we will need to be competitive in all industries of global markets. It is advantageous to have well-talented, well-educated workers because they are more efficient and productive employees. This is why we must prioritize education and job skills training. With the sequestering of discretionary spending, our education system is at risk. The cuts will decrease the already limited funding necessary for academic progress. It is necessary to reallocate funds. It is known that we spend more on war than education, give tax breaks to oil companies than on programs to provide young adults with job skills, bailouts to large companies but lay off teachers. College students are facing high educational costs because institutions are forced to impose higher rates due to the lack of state and government assistance. Unfortunately, after graduation, students are faced with two harsh realities. First, a large financial debt from student loans, and second, a meager job market. Posing a negative predicament for our government, if our graduating students cannot find jobs, they cannot pay their loans, creating the educational bubble to surpass the $1 trillion debt already owed. The American dream is made through higher education. Education promotes sustainability, which constructs a stronger America. We must come to a consensus on how to reform Medicare and Social Security benefits. Both programs have been successful in drastically reducing the elderly poverty level. However, the costs have made a substantial dent in our economy. According to the Urban Institute estimate, we are paying out less than we are ultimately receiving from the federal government. We need to regulate high medical costs, fees for services, and fraudulent practices. We can reform our healthcare with a model that allows patients to choose their healthcare with the savings that is utilized for medical purposes. This enables them to become informed, quality-conscious consumers, not just a number. We will create a better, more competitive market so that Medicare is no longer overcharged and providers will be more responsible and have strong incentives to reduce costs. Social Security reform solutions can include lifting the payroll tax cap, imposing a small increase in taxes, or delaying retirement age. These are programs that will pay into and never revel in its benefits. However, I understand they are necessary and vital to our nation, so we must invest in them. It is our ethical responsibility to take care of every citizen. So with the $16.6 trillion debt that we are ultimately responsible for and a 7.6% unemployment rate, my generation has inherited this state of concern, even before we could work or vote. We are not the labels given to us, a generation that is lazy, selfish, and self-entitled. We are concerned with education, careers, starting families, and owning our own homes. I urge you to take a hard look at what needs to happen today so that we don't fall into the greatest economic collapse of all time. We need financial sustainability that promotes education, employment, innovations, and national security. Your negotiations will shape the future of our country, but more so, they will impact the lives of our children in days to come. I'll do my part. Will you do yours?
Good evening, President Obama, Speaker Boehner, and Senator Reid. I don't have to be a mathematician to tell you that the U.S. national debt of nearly $16.8 trillion is enormous. But a number so large is completely unfathomable until it's put into perspective. If you spent $1 every second of one day, you would have spent $86,400, more than many Americans earn in a year. At the rate of spending $1 per second, spending $16.8 trillion would take more than 530,000 years. Our government has managed to reach that level in fewer than 200. This shouldn't come as a surprise. In 1935, when Social Security was just taking shape, one of its architects, J. Douglas Brown, was questioned by Edwin E. Witt. When Witt asked how the program would account for higher costs to future generations, Brown replied, "We will all be dead." Well, here we are today. The debt needs to be addressed now because it perpetuates itself. Historically, empires fall when they reach above 100% debt to GDP ratio. Just look at Spain in the 16th century, France in the 17th century, the Ottomans in the 18th century, and Britain in the 19th century. The U.S.'s debt to GDP ratio is currently above 100%, and at the projected growth rate is expected to be above 200% in the next 30 years, paralleling that of Japan after its tsunami and nuclear crisis. This is particularly pertinent to my generation. We've been cut a raw deal. Inheriting the massive debt is emotionally taxing, as it will hinder our ability to find jobs, pay mortgages, save for retirement, and eventually provide for our own children and the generations to follow due to the dwindling value of the dollar. Raising taxes is not the solution. Even if the entire wealth of the 400 richest Americans was exhausted, America would still be left with a debt of $15 trillion. So rather than focusing on postponements, the debt ceiling, and tax breaks, we need to focus on receipts and outlays. As a country, we need to collaborate in designing a plan free of bipartisanship, thereby helping all Americans. We need to approach spending in a socially responsible way. We need to spend our money wisely by using it efficiently. This isn't putting people on the streets or diminishing the effectiveness of our national defense. Now that it's surfaced, the most obvious first step is eliminating the billions spent on duplicate federal programs. We then need to focus on military spending. Defensive spending, which is upwards of $700 billion, currently makes up 20% of total spending. The most ideal utopian solution would be for you, President Obama, to sit down with leaders of all other nations and make peace, rendering the need for a defensive budget completely unnecessary. That shouldn't be so far-fetched, as we're all members of the world community sharing the same limited resources, yet functioning in our own facets. Realistically, though, that isn't going to happen, but we can implement this defensive methodology on a smaller scale by switching from counterterrorism to increased diplomacy through intelligence. That would address problems early on, saving money and, more importantly, lives. We should take a similar preventative approach in healthcare. Our current healthcare operates not as healthcare, but as sick care. It operates reactively and retrospectively. We can cut spending without reducing into all entitlements by focusing on preventative measures, catching problems such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol at their onset. We have the option of paying for U.S. healthcare now or later. Later costs a whole lot more, and dealing with it now preserves a healthier U.S. We still have the ability to save our nation from spiraling out of control because of the debt. $16.79 trillion did not magically appear, and it fittingly can't be remedied overnight. President Obama, you still have 3.5 years left in office. I'm confident that is enough time to begin transforming our country's infrastructure to that of a proactive nation. If all generations can begin thinking strategically, in time we can free ourselves from this national mess. We need to look forward, and we need to remember to keep looking forward. Thank you.
President Obama and Speaker Boehner, our national debt now stands at almost $17 trillion. This is a known fact. It's one of the reasons we're here tonight. Many of us also understand that each American represents about $50,000 of that debt. Sure, I could stand up here and tell you all of the things that you already know, but that is unnecessary. Instead, I'm going to share with you some lesser-known facts. For example, did you know that Abraham Lincoln was a licensed bartender? Or that Jimmy Carter was the first president to be born in a hospital? Or how about this one? In the 2012 fiscal year, America paid over $360 billion in interest alone. That is a frighteningly large number. That is equivalent to almost 40 fully equipped aircraft carriers for our Navy. That's over 3 million brand new BMW convertibles. That is enough money to feed every single person on the planet for a week. Obviously, the interest alone on our debt is significant. Let's take a look at what our country looks like today. Millions have lost their jobs, their homes, their way of life. I babysit for a single mother who works 3 jobs just to put food on the table. I see the worry in her eyes and the exhaustion on her face. She's not the only one. New construction and family-owned businesses are becoming few and far between. Every year, tuition prices for public colleges increases by about 6.5%. It's hard to stay optimistic when these harsh realities are staring us in the face. Next, let's think about what our country might look like in 5 years. It still looks pretty bleak. That's because this economy is destroying our future. Our toolbox for success, our college education and job prospects, are slipping away, and without action, we could lose them forever. As college prices skyrocket, more and more students are forced to take out loans averaging $25,000 apiece. And when they finally get out of school, they face a whole new set of problems. Back in 2007, about 146 million Americans were employed. Now, that number stands around 142.2 million. With fewer positions and more job demand, new grads fresh out of school and lacking experience will be overlooked in favor of older, more accomplished employees. Obviously, the debt does and will continue to affect young people. Finally, let's think about what the country as a whole could look like in 5 years. Budget cuts in our schools will likely continue until only the bare minimum is provided. Our military will be reduced because of lack of funds. And our space program? Well, that's almost gone already. The cessation and deduction of these programs poses a great threat to our national security. When schools lose funding, they cannot adequately prepare youth for an intellectually stimulating world. We'll be left in the dust as the rest of the world races forward with their higher science and math skills. Reduced military budgets could mean endangering our soldiers' lives when our outdated equipment has to go against enemy ammunition. Even our absence from space poses a threat. Did you know that NASA developed new imaging techniques in order to clarify the blurry images from the Hubble telescope? And that those same imaging techniques are still being used today to detect early breast cancer in women? Without the natural technology that accompanies space missions, we will be missing out on vast amounts of scientific knowledge. And we won't even know we missed it. Now, I'm not saying that taxation is the way to get us out of debt, and I'm not saying that we only need to cut spending. Instead, we need to focus on other ways of raising revenue. And that, gentlemen, is where you come in. President Obama, if you would like to continue all of your current programs, and Speaker Boehner, if you would like to avoid raising taxes on your constituents, you must find a way to raise revenue. I know sometimes politics can be messy, and it's not always easy to compromise, but our future is in your hands, and it's your responsibility to address our problems. Otherwise, our citizens, our youth, and our nation's security will suffer. Thank you.
Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt. Our 31st president, Herbert Hoover, gave us that one-liner, a quote worthy of any of today's political satirists. Our national debt and my generation's legacy is leaving me feeling more blessed than stressed. President Obama, Speaker Boehner, and Senator Reid, as a student approaching her college years, I'm overwhelmed with the high cost of tuition and the prospect of a dismal job market upon graduation, knowing that I am faced with my share of the responsibility of our national debt. It is estimated that each and every one of us in my generation owes $50,000. Not a very encouraging expectation considering that we could all be sent to college for free with that kind of money. The estimated growth of the national debt has been increasing at a rate of 8.5% annually and has more than doubled since 2000. The debt rises on average $3.8 billion a day. Now, our nation's debt snowball is hurling directly towards my generation, an ominous threat to our way of life that previous generations have failed to stop or to even slow down. Our country's interest payment on our national debt was over $360 billion in 2012 alone. That is more than 7 times the sequester cut this year. Here are some cold, hard facts. While the debates continue and Congress procrastinates in finalizing the tax rates and government spending, we wait. And while we wait, businesses face uncertainty and the growth is stalled, including plans for hiring. This means that there will be less jobs available for college graduates, and the probability of unemployment looms large. If businesses had more confidence in our economy, it is estimated that there could be 3.1 to 4.6 million additional jobs to be had. Over the years, federal programs such as Social Security and Medicare have been a boon to many. Too bad they won't be help for my generation. These programs have been funded by generations that preceded ours. With a large portion of the workforce retiring and my generation unable to find employment, there won't be as many people paying into these systems. If nothing is done to remedy this bad situation, Medicare will cease paying full benefits by 2024, and Social Security will do the same by 2033. We can start with certain federal programs to be much better off in the control of individual states. By shifting the chief concerns of both the Department of Education and the Department of Energy onto the capable shoulders of the states, we could slice at least $500 billion off the budget in the next 10 years. Other programs that can be converted to state regulation are Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program. This could be made possible with a single federal block grant. With these, we could save $2 trillion in a decade. These programs will not go away. They will just be put into the hands of those who can most effectively administer our tax dollars. One argument allows for paying higher taxes. Although, if we cannot manage our budget now, who's to say we can when the government has even more money? But until the government gets its addictive spending problem under control, there is no chance of ever getting our fiscal house in order. I love my country, I love the way of life, the freedom, and the strength that the United States represents, and I want my children to feel this same pride. Please make the search, or President Obama, Speaker Boehner, and Senator Reid, I urge you to take seriously our national debt problem and its effect on future generations. Please make the search of and implementation of workable solutions a priority to this administration. It is time for us to put a stop to the nation's debt growth. It is time for us to put a stop, or to melt the debt snowball and protect my generation from being left out in the cold. Thank you for your consideration.
When my friends and I want to grab lunch together, there's often dispute as to where we'll dine. Luckily for us, we can always reach an agreement. Eventually. But let's say we don't. What happens then? Well, we don't eat. This is the exact same position that the U.S. government is in, as it demonstrates before our very eyes the impossibility of our politicians reaching even an inkling of a middle ground when it comes to the discussion of the growing debt problem in the United States. And this forces us all to a standstill. President Barack Obama, according to CBS News on December 11, 2012, you voiced your refusal to cut spending on government benefit programs such as Social Security and Medicare. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, you've sided with the president in discounting the government's ability to make alterations to these programs. Speaker of the House John Boehner, according to the New York Times on February 28, 2013, you've stated on numerous occasions that you will not be accepting any cuts, any alterations to the current tax code, just so you can toe the party line, despite your previous intentions to support such changes. This refusal to negotiate, led by three of the most powerful people in the United States, makes massive gridlock inevitable. This gridlock leads to sequestration, and sequestration is just a fancy word for block cuts. These block cuts are implemented without any regard towards efficiency and with no evaluation of the repercussions. Even more demonstrative than these slash-and-burn methods, which already pose a huge threat to our nation, is the continuing resolution. The continuing resolution is a temporary budget passed to ensure that the government stayed open for business for a few months, but still mandated that if another budget was not passed after the deadline of the previous budget, the government would shut down. In other words, the promise that if something is not done soon, our federal government's going to go and hibernate. But before we continue to discuss the continuing resolution, let's discuss the impacts of the sequestration to give us a better idea on why large amounts of uncertainty and partisan bickering can be detrimental to our nation. In fact, the results of the sequestration will be disastrous. Vital programs that need funding in order to carry out their purpose will be eliminated because of these cuts. But as devastating as cuts will be to these agencies, the impacts that the sequestration will have on the everyday American are far greater. According to ABC News on February 21, 2013, sequestration will put 125,000 Americans at risk of becoming homeless. Preschools will be cut, and programs for children with disabilities will be threatened with closure. Not only that, but food inspections will be slowed down dramatically, putting millions of people's health at risk. Because of this sequestration, it seems that America is reverting back to how it used to be in the 19th century. The thing is, this continuing resolution can be avoided, just like the sequestration could have been dodged. But because we were, and still are, so obsessed with sticking to our respective parties, there was, and still is, no room for compromise, no room to fix the budget in time to avoid budget deadlines. And now we're faced with the same scenario with even bigger consequences if we fail. This debt isn't solely a Democratic problem, and it's not just a Republican issue. The blame belongs to all of us. In order to work out a functional budget before the continuing resolution expires, Democrats must make cuts to agencies they hold in high esteem, and Republicans must cut their own politically important programs as well. The reason we continuously have this debt problem in the United States is due to the lack of bipartisanship and the inability for politicians to even consider making cuts to programs deemed politically important to their respective parties. When no one in D.C. is willing to sacrifice, no problems are solved. However, if each side were to give up something precious, then it's no longer partisan bickering. The process of these bipartisan cuts will show that they can make sacrifices and that they can, will, and should put the everyday American above petty politics. And with that, we'll be on track to restoring our nation. We can all agree that fiscal discipline isn't cutting program after program without any regard towards accountability and of the programs in question. It's incontestable that both party sides refuse to be bipartisan, especially when considering programs deemed to be sacred, but in fact still have problems that can be ironed out for the betterment of the people. Thus, President Obama, Majority Leader Reid, Speaker Boehner, I ask that you make these bipartisan cuts to your programs. Cuts that are more than only budget choices, but signs of good faith. These cuts won't resolve the issue of the national debt. They will, however, introduce into D.C. real fiscal discipline that will, in time, solve this problem. Thank you.
When the potential shutdown of our federal government looms in the near future, it's easy to see that sequestration debate is the real March Madness. Yet potentially even more absurd is the fact that the cuts going into effect would be a mere $85 billion, a drop in the bucket compared to our $16.8 trillion deficit. Even more absurd potentially is the fact that you, Barack Obama, have stated that you do not believe that we have any immediate debt problems. And you, Speaker Boehner, have agreed and supported our president's assertion. I believe that the greatest problem in our nation currently is the fact that the leadership of the United States is not willing to admit that we have a problem in the first place. In the past, the United States has been known as a country to push and test the limits. Lately, this has been our downfall. The word ceiling is synonymous with the word limit. And more recently, as we approach the limit to our debt, the limit only seems to increase. This has led us to slide down the slippery slope of sequestration. Yet it is clear that this sequestration is clearly insufficient, given that over the next 10 years, we will only be cutting $1.2 trillion. At this rate, it will take well over a century in order for us to eliminate the $16.8 trillion debt, heavily burdening both my generation and future generations to come. Although you, President Obama, created a bipartisan super committee to solve this issue, this super committee was nothing like the superheroes of Marvel, in the fact that they were highly unsuccessful. However, I'm still optimistic due to the fact that I believe that our youth hold the key in solving our debt problem. Over the last couple months, I've heard a lot of talk about compromise. I don't think compromise is about small tax increases and small amounts of sequestration. I believe that a sufficient compromise would incorporate high levels of tax increases, high levels of sequestration, as well as reevaluation and reformation in the current programs that we have. For example, currently, the United States defense budget and international aid budget could do with massive cuts. Our defense budget makes up over 24% of our overall budget. Secretary of Defense Hagel is confident that there are many cuts to be made. And he says that once again, the size and shape of the United States military needs to be questioned. On a smaller level, over the course of the past 10 years, we've given $100 billion to Israel. This includes $3 billion this year and $3 billion in the years to come, even when we can't balance our own budget. I believe that we need to take a step back and look more closely at where we're spending our money and our philanthropic role in the international community. Now, when considering this, it seems like a small issue. However, I believe it represents our problem on a smaller scale. At the same time, you, President Barack Obama, have stated that you don't think that there is room for Social Security and Medicare in the current budget. But like I previously brought up, reforming by putting income caps on who can receive Social Security and Medicare could solve this problem by allowing for the same quality of care, but cutting back on who receives it. At the same time, I believe that we need to raise the age to qualify for Medicare, given that this would allow individuals who most need the care to receive it, while cutting back on the individuals who don't. Now is to answer the question as to why we need to do this. I believe that your generation has lived through 2 decades of tax cuts, or more tax procrastination as I'd like to call it. And my generation and future generations will likely only see tax hikes and will never see tax cuts. At this point, I believe that the debt is more of a question of responsibility than anything else. Thank you.
To our American leaders, I am proud to be an American. There is no doubt that our country is the best in the world. The strength and prosperity of our land was created by a visionary, problem-solving America that came before us. Recently, however, we've been having significant fiscal and economic problems. For years, our federal government has been running on larger and larger deficits, and we've piled up the largest debt as a percentage of GDP that we've had since World War II. To me, with each passing year, America's looking more and more like Shel Silverstein's Giving Tree. The Giving Tree is a story about a relationship between a boy and a tree over the course of the boy's lifetime. When he's young, the boy climbs and plays in the tree, eats her apples, and rests in her shade. But as the boy grows up, he doesn't enjoy this type of play anymore, and he asks for the tree's apples to sell for money, her branches to build a house, and her trunk to build a boat. The tree makes the sacrifices because she loves the boy unconditionally and wants him to be happy. But in the long run, we see that nothing the tree can give the boy can truly make him happy. No matter how many gifts the tree bestows upon him, the boy is left dissatisfied and wanting. The story ends very sadly, as the dissatisfied boy grows into a dissatisfied old man, and nothing is left of the tree but an old stump. While the story is usually interpreted as a parent-child relationship, I see it as the perfect metaphor for the current relationship between us, the American people, and our government. Like the tree, our government values generosity over responsibility. It looks great for politicians if they can provide funding for seemingly righteous programs. Democrats want higher taxes and higher spending, but given the choice between the two, they'd opt for higher spending. Similarly, Republicans would favor tax cuts over spending cuts. Our elected leaders personally gain from running a deficit, but all this excess adds stress to our government. And we Americans are egging them on by behaving like the boy. Rather than solving our own problems with our trademark American ingenuity, we too often turn to the government for help. The government will shelter us from the rising cost of health care, dole out food stamps if we're hungry, and help us out if we're unemployed. The more entitlements there are, the more we feel entitled. This is a vicious cycle that results in greater and greater increases in the deficit. Worse yet, this attitude undermines the American spirit. The genius of America has always been to let loose and reward the citizens' work ethic and creative energy. When Americans work and make their own life better, they make the country better as well. When people think like the boy in the giving tree, trying to take rather than to make a living, the system breaks down. This is why our economy remains stagnant, even while we are running a huge deficit. We're worrying more than ever about what the government will do for us. If we are going to continue to make America stronger, we need to snap out of the world of the giving tree. I have 3 key steps that will do this. First, we have to change the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. The Fed is holding interest rates so artificially low that we are currently paying less than 2.5% interest on our debt. Now, this helps stem the growth of the debt for now, but it also lulls us into a false sense of security. Low interest rates are making us think the debt is less meaningful than it is. If the Fed were to let rates rise to a more natural level, we'd be in for a rude, but much needed, awakening. And the debt would become our top priority, as it should. Second, we need to get America to work. We can't play the role of the giving tree when Americans ask for unemployment, food stamps, or welfare. We would gain a lot of our productivity back if we phased out unemployment benefits more rapidly, or made living on public assistance uncomfortable enough to make work worthwhile. Not only are we saving money, but the added productivity creates growth and thus revenue. Finally, our excessive spending must stop. Granted, every American has felt the pain of the 2008 recession and the slow recovery, and the spending cuts will hurt a lot. But we can't continue to throw money at the problem. Governor Romney had a good test. Is it really worth borrowing money from China to pay for all of this? It wouldn't bring our economy to its needs if we trimmed Medicaid, cut billions of dollars of green energy subsidies, or raised the retirement age by 2 years. Mr. President, the irony of your preschool proposal is that the kids themselves will be stuck with the bill. I realize that there is some tough decisions to make, but it's your job, and your country is counting on you. The untold tragedy of the giving tree is that the boy's children and grandchildren will never be able to play in the tree. America should be able to do better than that.